My name's Danny Wallace, and this is Secrets of the CIA. America has had a secret service since 1946, and throughout those years, it's been responsible for mayhem, murder, and revolution. Coming up, we uncover the CIA's secret assassination program responsible for tens of thousands of deaths. But first, let's take a look at how the CIA turned a man from Cuba into an icon by mistake.
Clandestino aquí presente.
Che Guevara went straight to the top of the CIA's most wanted list after organising the military side of the Cuban Revolution. He wanted to spread communism throughout Central America. The CIA wanted him stopped. By 1967, Che and his band of guerrilla fighters were in the jungles of Bolivia. The USA had had enough. Che had to go.
The whole concept of guerrilla war was enshrined and symbolised, personified in Che Guevara. So long as he was free, so long as his reputation, which was always greater than his successes, continued to circulate, the idea of armed resistance to American imperialism continued, as long as he lived.
The CIA was terrified of Che because he was obviously very popular. He was young, he was good-looking, the girls liked him and so on, and he was fashionable. And suddenly communism wasn't sort of red in tooth and claw communism. It was, hey, Che Guevara, you know, well, could be the father of my baby. So the CIA decided it was time to get rid of Che, and they did their very best to assassinate him. In those days, CIA-sponsored assassinations, wet jobs, executive action, whatever you call it, were allowed. And they caught up with him eventually in Bolivia.
So the CIA came up with a plan to get rid of him. Felix Rodriguez, the CIA's main man in the hunt for Che Guevara, has admitted to ordering his assassination.
Guevara was finally picked up by a Bolivian ranger. Bear in mind, this was a highly trained counter-guerrilla force, trained by the Americans, and he was then taken to a small schoolhouse in La Higuera where his presence was announced, and where there was, in particular, one man, Felix Rodriguez, who had been in Cuba, been at the Bay of Pagans, and is a figure who reappears constantly through the next 30 years of the CIA's history. He was in La Higuera. He claims, his account is that he received a phone call instructing him to murder Guevara and authorize his killing by a local Bolivian sergeant. Che Guevara was murdered on October the 9th, 1967. In the minds of the CIA and the people around them, a dead Che would be one danger less, that he would be eliminated from the scene. To look around the world now in the beginning of the 21st century and see to what extent the image of Che Guevara has not only persisted, but has been picked up again precisely as a symbol of resistance, of anti-imperialism. You know, if they sought to kill off that idea, they failed.
Ironically, a dead Che Guevara became a much bigger problem for the CIA than the live one. Instead of dying away quietly, Che's face quickly became one of the most recognizable and iconic images in the world. And it still is today.
I think Che became an icon because he stood for something. And it was at a time where revolution was in the air in terms of how young people thought, and especially students. The company that I started, you know, Red or Dead, came out of the phrase better red than dead, and it was all of that time about young people thinking about revolution. Increasingly, there's a big industry behind Che. I remember a T-shirt out not so long ago with Jesus done in the same black and red with his crown of thorns, and you had to take a double take to see if it was a Che T-shirt, or if it was a picture of Jesus. But then more overt than that, you know, you get Ricky Gervais, you get Madonna, you get Citizen Smith. You know, there's all these marketing departments and stylists saying, well, for this video, do a bit of Che because, you know, it fits with the style of it, and it'll get you in the press on this and that, and it's a surefire winner. Wow!
I think the idea that Che Guevara represented a threat to Western democracy was complete balderdash. He was an attractive man who spoke revolution, who smoked cigars, who wore those kind of sexy green fatigues, but he didn't represent a threat to the Western world. But in the warped mind of some CIA people, policymakers, they thought this man is potentially very dangerous. He could inflame the young towards the idea of Marxist revolution.
Well, probably the best way to become an icon is to be assassinated by the CIA.
When the USA became involved in the Vietnam War, everyone in America was convinced that it'd be a short, easy war and that they'd quickly beat the communists. But despite having much more money, guns and bombs, the Americans couldn't win the war in Vietnam. Their opponents in the Viet Cong didn't play by the rules. Instead, they perfected the rules of insurgent fighting, still being used today in Iraq.
The Americans felt the need to hold the line, to proclaim to the rest of the world that the communists were not going to take over and that freedom and democracy of the sword would flourish. And I guess they believed it.
The enemy has turned more and more to the use of terror and murder as a way of maintaining his grip on the people, hoping to intimidate them into support as the voluntary support weakens.
Frustrated by the Army's lack of success in Vietnam, President Lyndon Johnson turned to William Colby, the director of the CIA, for a top-secret answer to the Vietnam problem. The CIA's idea: wet jobs. Using the Viet Cong's own tactics on itself and making lightning guerrilla raids to kill key Viet Cong leaders. It was called the Phoenix Program.
It was a program of assassination. Some of the strategies employed by Phoenix operatives might be to slit a potential Viet Cong, his throat in the night, throwing various suspected Viet Cong out of helicopters. You'd have two of them, you'd get one of them to talk by throwing the other one out of the helicopter to his death. Starving a suspected Viet Cong operative to death. A lot of procedures that, while they were excused at the time and in retrospect by people as being absolutely necessary, given the ugly nature of the conflict, I think it's easy to see why so many Americans were uncomfortable with this program and why it became a target for anti-war critics at the time.
I saw other interrogations to describe them briefly. The use of the insertion of a 6-inch dowel into the semicircular canal of one of my detainees' ears and the tapping through to the brain until he died.
My verdict on Phoenix would be no, it didn't work. It didn't work, first of all, because obviously the United States lost the war. The Viet Cong infrastructure was not eliminated. Even more than that, I think it turned many Vietnamese against the United States. When they saw the tactics being employed, either by Americans themselves or by South Vietnamese who were drawing their paychecks from the United States, I think it killed our image.
William Colby, the head of the CIA, later testified before the U.S. Congress that there were more than 20,000 extrajudicial executions done by the United States in the Phoenix program. That's to say, we summarily executed more than 20,000 people.
How many, roughly, would you estimate were eliminated?
Some 28,000 had been captured, some 20,000 had been killed, and some 17,000 had actually rallied by that time.
All the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray, and the sky is gray.
The Phoenix program was a disaster on every single level. It horrified the American public and helped turn them against the war. And what's more, it simply didn't reduce the Viet Cong's military capability.
The prospect of a ceasefire hasn't made the position of the Vietnamese in the battle areas any easier. Indeed, it's made it much more difficult.
The impact of the Vietnam War in America was absolutely colossal. It was the one war that the Americans actually lost, and that was a huge shock to the system. Whatever they'd done, it hadn't worked. The greatest military machine in the world was powerless to bring about a political solution. And I think that's one of the lessons of the late 20th, early 21st century, that war as we used to understand it doesn't achieve its objectives. Almost never does it achieve its objectives.
By 1970, the CIA had perfected the art of overthrowing democratically elected leaders. Iran, Congo and Indonesia had already fallen victim to CIA plots to depose and replace their prime ministers. Now the CIA turned its attentions to Chile, with devastating results. In 1970, the people of Chile made the mistake of electing a socialist prime minister, Salvador Allende. Allende was the people's choice, but he wasn't the CIA's choice, so they spent $8 million to get rid of him.
Salvador Allende was the first avowed Marxist, it was often said, to actually be elected in the Western world. He was a leader of the Chilean Socialist Party, which was one part of a coalition called Popular Unity.
This popular government, we're going to distribute the land. The Mapuches and the indigenous people in the south are going to have the land back after hundreds of years of occupation. We're going to keep our forestry for us. We're going to keep our fish. We're going to keep our copper, and we're going to distribute it more equally.
Here was somebody who at last came to power through the ballot box, and here was somebody who was defeated not through the ballot box, but by violence.
The agency started to pour money into a series of covert operations to discredit Allende, pour money into the anti-Allende political parties, work closely with the Chilean military to build up our influence there, conduct operations to kind of divide and upset Allende's ruling coalition. And then a major propaganda operation, and that was pouring millions of dollars into the leading anti-Allende newspaper, El Mercurio, transforming El Mercurio into a bullhorn for military operations against Allende. This propaganda operation helped set the stage for the military coup of September 11th, 1973.
Here, counter-revolution started, prepared and financed by the United States, organized by traitorous and disloyal generals and fascists.
On September the 11th, 1973, General Augusto Pinochet and his army marched on Santiago, the capital of Chile, and stormed the palace. Salvador Allende was killed in the process. With Pinochet in power, violence, corruption and torture quickly spread throughout Chile. New documents show that in the weeks after the coup, Pinochet's troops arrested around 130,000 people and imprisoned them without trial.
What Pinochet did was kill thousands of people. Hundreds were executed in the football stadium. One of the favourite ways of dealing with dissidents was to take them out over the sea in a helicopter and drop them into the sea.
Luis Minoze and his wife Diana were two of the people targeted.
I came back home and she never arrived. And I knew that she had been gone. I waited, and I waited all night. I was screaming and crying because I knew that I wouldn't. That feeling, that this is it. And it's true. It became true. Never saw her again. I was taken to this secret torture center. I spent a long time, nearly 3 months, and then 2 years in concentration camps. This person is going to be tortured till he died or she died. It's going to be suffocated. It's going to be raped in the case of women and men as well. I was lucky, one of the survivors.
If you walk around Santiago, the capital of Chile, with people, they will point out to you every now and then a house which might look quite innocent now, but which is remembered by one generation as a place of torture and horror, where 15 or 20 years ago you could hear the screams from this building. That's the memory. And it takes a very long time for that memory to fade, especially while those who were responsible for those crimes still walk the streets.
These are people responsible for the death and the massacres of hundreds and thousands of people. Come on, there's no excuse.
Pinochet in Chile became a focal point for international condemnation of human rights violations in Latin America and international condemnation of the United States of America for both openly and through the CIA supporting regimes such as Augusto Pinochet's.
Coming up, we'll be digging even deeper into the files the CIA really doesn't want you to see. All that after the break.
Islam is politics, or it is nothing at all.
Among the victims were both my parents and my 2 sisters and 20 other relatives.
The war is over, but the dying isn't.
Here the CIA was deeply involved.
It was clearly an illegal action.
Big trouble with the Islamists. There are 1.3 billion of them now, and they're all very mightily upset with us.